Well, welcome to this first webinar in a two-part series all about philanthropy and education. My name is Melissa Martin. I am with ATS Lab Midwest and Mission Learning Systems. I am joined by a couple of just incredible subject matter experts in the world of STEM and technical education and philanthropic giving who are going to share some really incredible insights and creative ideas and just out of the box thinking in terms of how we create support for these big education initiatives that to fund all the amazing projects that you're working on in your districts. Tons and tons of value coming your way. With that, I am going to kick it off to one of our two speakers, Matt Kirkner.
All right, Melissa. Well, thank you so much. Thank to everybody who's joining us for this webinar, whether you're on live or you're joining us after the fact. It is absolutely awesome to have you with us. A couple things to just clarify as we're getting started. The first one is this. I was looking at the registration list as we got started for the webinar today. All kinds of people from various backgrounds. We have administrators, we have members of staff, we have people who are responsible for development, we have teachers, we have instructors, we have professors. I want to make it clear that no matter what your discipline is, there will be content that will be incredibly valuable to you in this particular webinar. So hang on throughout the entire webinar. That's number one. Number two, if you're jumping on because you want to get a list of foundations or people or companies that will give you money, you will be sorely disappointed by this webinar. That is not why we're here. We're here to talk about how we build rock solid relationships with potential donors and how you can go out into your community and build those kind of relationships. That is our purpose. Finally, I think it's important for me to note that Mission Lab Midwest, Mission Learning Systems, and ATS Midwest collectively are a mission-driven organization. We are securing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent, which is why almost a year ago now, we added to our team one of my just greatest friends. Michael Frona is doing so much cool stuff. We met when he was the president of Junior Achievement of Wisconsin, creating incredible entrepreneurship opportunities for young people, generating financial literacy, putting them on pathways that you would not believe. And right away, I was like, this is the kind of person that I want to work with. And so Michael has been a part of our team, a key part of our team now for going on a year, working with primarily K-12 school districts, but all of our stakeholders in building really, really great relationships between communities and educators. So Michael, such a pleasure to have you here. And thanks so much for coming on.
Well, thank you, Matt and Melissa, and thanks for everyone who's joined us today.
So I think, Michael, a good place for us to start is to do a little bit of a pop quiz. Let's get that audience engagement right off the bat. And so, Melissa, I'm going to kick it over to you and you can handle the logistics here.
Yeah, I have to apologize to all of our attendees because you thought you were on summer break and here you're getting a pop quiz. So, what we want to do is just get a little gauge for everyone's understanding. You won't be judged on this, and all of your responses will be anonymous. Don't worry. But we're going to see what you know about the current state of philanthropy. So the first question you're going to see is how much money was given in the United States in 2025? What percent of the total given was donated by individuals, foundations, bequests, and corporations? What areas of focus made up the top three types of organizations receiving the most support? Notice there is also an extra credit question. What percent of any group generally loves asking for money? We will also address that answer in just a moment. All right, Matt, we will kick it back over to you.
All right, Melissa. Well, I love the fact that you had an extra credit question. I know that you were the kind of student that always did extra credit when you were in school. So awesome that we set that up for our audience. I want to talk a little bit about some of the projects that we've been involved with over the years that have been funded, at least in part, by outside philanthropy, by donors in the community of the districts, of the schools, of the colleges, and so on, where these projects were taking place. I get questions a lot of times from folks, and they're like, do private donors really fund these projects in K-12 education? And the answer is absolutely. I could do an entire webinar talking about some of these incredible programs. 4 companies in the Midwest that got together and collected and pooled their resources, got some state funding, and actually set up technical education programs, a rotational one in 4 different districts in their area. A huge manufacturer of kitchen appliances and fixtures, if you will, that company funded a whole bunch of Thanic robots going right into their local community. There's a huge power equipment company that set up learning labs in every single school district in which they had a manufacturing plant, and they worked really closely with those districts, teaching students welding, robotic welding, teaching them how to program Fanuc robots, teaching them advanced manufacturing, mechatronics. The largest furniture manufacturer in the world has funded a number of great emerging technologies and Industry 4.0 programs, no question about that. I was involved in a project about 2 years ago in a state of Michigan where a private donor, an anonymous private donor, believe it or not, gifted $100 million to a local school district to set up a technical education building and programming. And it was all about putting students on the right career pathways. These projects can and do happen. They happen for the right reasons, and that's what we're going to learn about with Michael Frona today. And by the way, it's not just industrial employers. A lot of times we can see a huge groundswell of community support from a whole variety of donors to fund these kind of projects, many times in partnership with public funding as well. So really, really excited to learn about everything that Michael has to teach us. Michael, tell us a little bit about your background in raising, building all these incredible relationships and raising opportunities to work with philanthropic donors.
Thanks again, Matt, for having me and the question, and for those of you who are participating today. Have you ever had an experience, I'm sure you have, Matt, and others, where you don't really know the significance of it until you get out a few years or decades and you look back and see like this influenced me or at least helped me? Well, if you've had that experience, that's how I got started in philanthropy. When I was 12 years old, my brother was sponsoring a major carnival for a national organization, and we needed prizes. So we went into the industrial park on our bikes, and we drove around. And he said, "Okay, go in there and ask him if they want to donate something for our carnival." So I said, "Okay, why not?" And I went in, and at first it was a little fearful. I was worried that I was going to get rejected. But when the first person said yes, and the second person said yes, and the third business said yes, I said, that means the fourth and the fifth and the 12th, they all must be saying yes. And all of a sudden, my asking became a lot easier. Very similar to that time, I was in the Scouts, and we had the assignment to go out and sell light bulbs and number 2 pencils. Now, I know that's dating me a little bit, but that's what we were doing. And I watched my friends, and they went from house to house to house. And I said, that's a lot of footwork to go from house to house to house. I'm going to go to an apartment building. And I went into the apartment buildings and I started selling light bulbs and number 2 pencils. And both those experiences, going back to the first one, when you start to expect people to say yes, it's a lot easier to ask because you don't fear rejection. And when you're providing something efficiently and what people need, like light bulbs and number 2 pencils, they want to engage with you, and that became easier. Well, fast forward, I didn't go into philanthropy and fundraising on purpose. I got a degree in education, Matt, and I decided over time that, moving people in philanthropy is really like teaching. You start at point A and you want to go to point B. And so I took my career away from my degree in education and moved it toward working in philanthropy for national organizations, for local healthcare organizations, a liberal arts college, very prominent in the Midwest, and then finally finished my career really as the president of Junior Achievement of Wisconsin, where 90% of the dollars we had to operate our mission came from partnerships, and most of those in industry and business. Really, really rewarding work, I would say. And now I'm helping other organizations and schools like those represented online, as well as helping leadership teams get organized to take out the friction that might exist so that they can move forward with confidence in their philanthropy program.
And I've learned so much from you, Michael, over the course of our 12 months working together on this, and certainly the time that you were at Junior Achievement as well. So that way that you introduced this topic with light bulbs and number 2 pencils, that is quintessential Michael Frona, absolute perfect example of doing things for the right reasons, adding value for all of our partners. And that's really what this whole idea is about. And now I was a little ahead of myself before, but it is time indeed to pass this back over to Melissa Martin to talk a little bit about the results of our poll.
Yeah, let's just take a look at the results real quick. So let's just look at anecdotally some of the responses and how much money was charitably given in the United States 2025. A whole handful of people said a billion, we got 3.5, 1.8, 600, 2 billion, 22 million. So a variety of answers. Some of you, I will say, are pretty close. So we'll let you know who was close. How many of was given by individuals? Pretty even split, but majority of people were guessing that 19% was given by individuals. At the same time, a vast majority of you thought that 19% was given by foundations. And then bequests, it looks like about half of our audience guessed that 7% was donated by bequests. Pretty split here, but the leading score was 7% donated by corporations. And then finally, if we compiled all of the data, it looks like our audience thought that the top three areas that were given the most funding in 2025 were health, education, and environment. So I will close those guesses and we will go through actually the final results, kicking it back over to Matt and Michael. Matt?
So, Michael, go ahead and tell us a little bit about what might surprise our audience here in terms of the current state of philanthropy.
Well, part of what surprised me in the poll was that some of you were really, really close to getting this spot on, if not right on. And I don't know if that's because you've heard me talk and we've had an opportunity to interact, but you're absolutely close when you were over a billion and certainly 617 $2.2 billion. This is the first time since a record history of tracking philanthropy that we have seen charitable giving exceed $600 million. That's about $1.2 million a second. I'm sorry, a minute, and about $19,000 a second. So when I look at this, when I think about the totality of giving, Matt, what I see is there is enough money out there for it to go around for the right reasons, with the right effort, with the right promises to use philanthropy in the right way. A couple things to note is that it has grown. And it's not only just growing by real dollars, but also adjusted inflated dollars. And it's an increase of $33 billion over 2024. That is significant growth. One of the things you're not seeing here, and we're not going to talk about it real deeply, is that we're actually seeing the number of gifts slightly decrease while the amounts of those gifts are increasing. So I share this with the audience because sometimes we want to shoot too small. Sometimes we don't think that we're deserving of a larger gift, but know that people are making larger investments with less frequency as opposed to smaller investments with more frequency. So clearly, a lot of money is charitably given in the United States every year.
It's absolutely fascinating when you think about those numbers. And I saw some of the results and some of the items that our individual guessers, if you will, were putting into the forum, and there were numbers like $2 billion, $50 million. So to think about a number like $617.2 billion, that is really, really amazing that you're seeing that kind of money flowing into philanthropic giving, and it really gives our audience, I think, an understanding and a sense for what might be possible when they start thinking about what could be possible in their communities. Anything you would add to that slide, Michael, before we run into our next question?
Well, not only is it the amount, but I think what the participants today will be surprised by is where this money is actually coming from. So let's take a look at the next slide. 64 cents of every dollar is donated by individuals. When you add the amount of dollars that are coming from bequests, basically what people are leaving in their wills, that's an additional 10%. So now we're at 74 cents of every dollar coming from individuals who have deliberately in their life or after their life made a promise to help your organization achieve its mission. And there's nothing really more important, I think, on this slide is to put an exclamation point here, to put a pin in it, is that if you're not talking to individuals about the stories you're trying to write inside your schools on your campus, you're missing a significant opportunity. When we look at foundations, and some of those foundations, if you just say that one back, Melissa, just a minute. If you look at foundations, you'll see it's still like something like 20% of giving is done by foundations, and corporations, very significant $43 billion, but as a percentage of every dollar donated, it's fairly low. And so where we put our energy and where we build the relationships really does matter. And on this next slide that we were headed toward, the top three types of organizations that are receiving the kinds of support is really two, I think, out of the three are in spaces that our audience represents today. I didn't see religion as one of them on the poll, but religion does indeed pretty significantly receive the majority of the contributions year in and year out. What we see then in second place and third place is human services and education. And this vacillates. Some years, education is number two and human services number three. But generally speaking, these are the top three organizations that receive the most support every year. And when some people see this in education, Matt, they think, well, we're not really human services. But if you think about some of the programs that your school runs that supports that pursuit of pursuing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent, you can begin to see where there might be some overlap. So think about it in the way that you represent at least one, if not two, of these significant components where dollars are going. And if you look at the education note, it's up almost 12%, the fastest growth of the top three categories. So there's a lot moving in our favor. The headwinds are limited, the tailwinds are strong.
I love it. So any other comments on our poll here before we go on to our next question?
Well, let me just mention the extra credit because we know extra credit's important. What percentage of people actually love asking for money? And it's 0.0000001% mostly. People not only don't they not like asking for money, they don't even like the idea of asking people for money. And so we're going to spend the rest of our time today talking about how do you overcome that, because there's a paradox. The paradox is this: we don't like asking for money, but people love to give. So when we don't ask, when we don't invite, we're limiting opportunities for people to be at their best.
And we're really missing an opportunity. And that's what the rest of this is all about is, and I'd be honest with you, and you know this, Michael, I'm one of those people that isn't always comfortable asking for money. Certainly happy to accommodate individuals that want to support education, but it is a little bit of a challenge when you're the person that has to sit down and talk about development, talk about giving. But the truth is that there's a really creative and comfortable way to go about doing this. And we're going to get into that here in just a moment. Before we do, are there any myths that we need to dispel in terms of giving and philanthropy here in the United States?
When I talk about why we have that trepidation to ask for a gift, it's usually because we're operating under the series of myths, or when we're spending energy on something and we're not getting the results, it's because we're operating from a framework of what those myths are. And so this bumper sticker, which I saw on a real car, says, "Don't believe everything you think about fundraising," what I hope to address for the next few minutes. You're going to see all the myths at once, and feel free to obviously to skim those, but let me just talk about and highlight just a few of those. The very first one: fundraising is just asking for money. Growing up, I ended up being a parent and having a daughter who brought me to school on career day, and she introduced me this way. She said, "This is my dad. He takes money from people, and he won't even buy me a TV for my room." And that indeed is true. But interestingly, from the perspective of somebody else, that's what I was doing. I was taking money from people. But really, successful fundraising comes from those relationships. It's a two-way street. If you think back even to when you might have been a child in your home and you had an opportunity to do a chore and you got a 25 cents or $1 for doing that, that was an exchange of values. There was something you did to earn something. And no different than in the workplace. And now, instead of doing something to earn something, someone is investing in you to get an exchange of values. So fundraising isn't just asking for money. It's a two-way street where values are expressed and values are shared. Number two myth. I see this all the time, and I hear this too. Success depends on a great mission and a handful of wealthy major donors, and nothing really could be too much further from the truth. One of the things that may be true for some of our participants, and certainly you've seen it in other organizations, is something that's said like this: "We're the best kept secret this side of the Mississippi. We're the best kept secret." And it's almost said it as though it's a badge of honor. And I say it's probably none of those things. It really is a lack of your ability to express meaningfully what the purpose and mission of your organization is. And not only that, related to number one, is what value are you creating in the community? Because if it was that great mission, you'd have storytellers who would be sharing those stories and not leaving it up to chance for people to hear from you. And then the second part of this myth is that we only need a few wealthy donors. Yes, there are definitely people who you can count on year in and year out to support your initiatives. But more importantly is when we see that groundswell of smaller gifts and then the medium-sized gifts and a little bit higher gifts, that's what makes the cycle go around. We oftentimes joke that if you want $1 million, you have to have $1 million idea. Well, the reality is that from somebody's first gift to their first $1 million gift, it's generally 15 to 20 years before that gift is made. So yes, eventually they could become one of your wealthy donors, but we really need a diversified base of many people who believe in a mission that they can articulate because they've heard you share it. The third myth is something that I think many of our participants today, smaller school districts or schools that live in the shadows of bigger organizations like United Way or the YMCA or Boys and Girls Club or you name any of those national organizations, they say we will never get to that. We will never aspire to the millions of dollars that they're raising. And you don't have to, number one. And number two is actually your ability to put those dollars to work sooner, faster, more efficiently because you don't have the overhead of running an entire advancement or fundraising department really is beneficial to your purpose. And so you don't worry about the big ones, just worry about the big thing that you're trying to do. You have the ability to develop closer relationships on multiple levels with organizations within your community who may be interested in supporting education. The fourth myth is, well, if we only could have an annual event, like, cause they raised the paddle at that event and they raised, several $100,000. And so we get this idea that we want to have an event. And let me just on to say, I've done enough events to know that they have a place and a purpose. But when you're talking about building an active philanthropy program, they are really the end of the story. They're the epilogue to the story and the activity you're pursuing for fundraising. And the reason I say that is because per dollar, they're often the least efficient operations to run. And most of the time, special events tell the story of your mission. They don't really support the mission. They're very transactional. So if you have limited time and limited resources, I would not do a special event. And number 5 myth is grants are all that. They win the day, that if you can just get a handful of grants, you'll be set. One of the reasons why we lean on grants a lot is because they're safe. We don't really have to have a personal relationship with anybody. We just write to the foundation, write to the corporation. And for those of you who've been successful in grant writing, you know that it's different. Writing a grant is like establishing a relationship with a really trusted friend. Now, there are places where the Perkins grants and other workforce development grants are perfectly positioned to help schools do the kinds of things that we're offering and what we do in technology and STEM education. But if you have a choice between building a relationship with an individual donor or family before a foundation, to write a grant to, I would certainly advise that. Because for them, your school may not be the priority. And additionally, getting support after the grant and providing what they're requiring can often be more difficult than actually writing the grant itself. And the question needs to be, the question needs to be is who's going to do that?
Absolutely. Yeah. The compliance side of that can be quite harrowing, which a lot of times actually discourages districts in some cases from applying for grants in the first place. I think a good point to make is that the grants can work hand in hand, and so as can government funding with the with the other philanthropic giving that you may be developing. So certainly there's an opportunity to make both of those work, and we see many examples of that. But you're right, if you're putting all your eggs in that grant basket, that can be a really unsatisfying endeavor. I'm not going to reflect on every one of the myths, Michael, but I will say that, you're number one, this myth that fundraising is just asking for money. And the fact that you put relationships right into that first myth, that I just totally agree with that. And this is, you talked about if you want $1 million, you need $1 million idea, or the other line that we use from time to time is if you ask for money, you'll get advice. If you ask for advice, you'll get money. I love both of those. I stole that from a good friend of mine who's the CEO of a college here in Wisconsin. But the truth of the matter is that this is about building a relationship. This is about common purpose. This is about finding a way to let that individual live out their dreams and live out their aspirations for their community in a way that's meaningful to every single one of the parties. So I'm really glad that you pointed out that particular myth. Now, I'm guessing that our audience, Michael, is making an assumption that Michael was just born and had all of these skills and had all of this wisdom and just knew exactly how to go about generating development and philanthropy in a variety of different organizations and endeavors. On the outside chance that that isn't true, are there any mistakes that you've made, or where can organizations maybe go wrong when they're trying to develop these relationships?
Yeah, if you think selling light bulbs with number 2 pencils gave me the skills I needed to raise millions, that would be a stretch. And so, yeah, there's definitely ways that I have fumbled and stumbled along the way. And that's part of this. It's not necessarily knowing everything. In fact, the pursuit of perfection in philanthropy often limits the possibilities, because when we think that we can't do it, we probably won't, as opposed to just setting out and do something. And I'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute. But what I would say is I don't think there's anybody in the fundraising profession today who could honestly say they wouldn't want a few redos, some do-overs, because of, and I'm not just talking about one or two, I'm talking about several. And I'll put these in categories both for me and what I see in organizations relative to to where they might stumble and fumble along the way. And the first one is we answer for the individuals. Oh, excuse me. They can't possibly have money for us because they just gave money to somebody else, and so we don't ever make the invitation, or we don't ever go to ask. Or we're really uncomfortable with asking, so we become professional visitors. We show and tell. We bring people into the school and show all the great things we're doing, but the person leaves going, okay, well, that's nice. I feel inspired, but now what? I had an experience once where I was so nervous to ask this woman of very high means for a gift that I kept on inviting her to breakfast into the school I was representing, and she would graciously meet with me, Matt, and she would smile and nod and say, "Oh, I like that," and all like that. And so she liked so many things. I kept on talking about all the things that she liked and that we were doing, but I never asked her for her gift. And it was she that at the end of like the fifth breakfast or the sixth breakfast, she said, "Michael, would you like to ask me for a gift of support?" And I said, "Oh, Diane, I sure would." And so I did. So it was my fear in a way, and I was becoming more of a professional visitor. The flip side of being a professional visitor, and this is just a cautionary tale that may or may not happen to people today, but there are some people who are just looking for attention with no intention to make a gift. And they will want to come to your school. They will come to your campus. They might come to your events, to your lectures. They might meet with you several times, but they have no intention of making the gift. So that's basically the two sides of the same coin: is don't become a professional visitor yourself, and be aware of when somebody else is just looking for attention without really the intention to make a gift. And then waiting for that perfect time. I could get into the details, but for time's sake, let me just say I was working with an individual and I just could not get myself convinced that he was ready to make the gift. There was just two more things I could do, one more thing I could send him, and he passed away before I ever made the gift request from him. And so I like to say we have to stop packing and start traveling. Even if we don't have everything we think we need for the trip, there's a really good chance that we do. And the fourth thing I would add as a mistake is that I try to let the brochures, the emails, and the letters do the heavy lifting for me. If I just send that email, or I just make this post, somehow that's going to magically translate to people calling me up or sending me an email or clicking on that give button on our website to receive all these contributions. And that's not what it is. It goes back to the eyeball to eyeball, shoulder to shoulder, shared values. And I like to say, unless someone keeps their values in their pockets, there's no reason to get into them. And you just can't possibly build a relationship successfully simply through electronic means. We have to get out more and establish those relationships. And so I think for me personally, those are mistakes I know and I've learned from. And I think I know I see organizations and education institutions doing some of those same mistakes. But there's a couple more, Matt, if I could just highlight where I see some of the other mistakes being made. One of them is that there's a lack of coordination between entities. So in a school, for example, the athletic department, the athletic boosters might be out generating support. You might have a dance or an arts council that's out doing the same thing. You may have some academic programs. You may have an education foundation that's raising money for priorities. When that lacks coordination and the priorities aren't known, we on the inside say, well, everybody knows that the Booster Club is different than the Arts Council, but the reality is that the community doesn't. So we have to get really fine tuned on the inside. We have to limit that friction between what are the priorities of our school at this time. So we go out to the community and to the public with a unified message, because I've seen it happen where the athletics go out and say, well, you sponsor $1,000 to be Friday Night Light sponsor, and somebody else was already getting ready to ask them for a $10,000 gift, and you know which one they'll go for most likely. It's the $1,000. So make sure you're coordinated on the inside, and make sure you're not just busy in showing and telling, but show and go. Show them how your school can help meet their workforce needs, because there's many people who we think are familiar with the high school, but they haven't been in your high school since they graduated themselves, and that could be decades. But because we're in the news, we're on social media, we think, well, they must know. Well, they don't know. So have them come, show them what you do, and then go and find out what their needs are. And avoid saying no for the donor. I highlighted this a little bit before, where we just think there's no way that anybody could be interested in what we're doing, and so we self-sabotage. Go back to getting the prizes for the carnival that I was at. Expect people to say yes, and you'll limit that. And finally, I would say another mistake I see organizations making is that they think one size fits all, or one size fits most, and they'll do the same thing over and over again to attract the relationships and build the relationships. But we know one size fits one. And so build individual relationships to match what they value and what the school is offering. Those are the most common mistakes I see.
Well, and I love the personal aspect of it, and going back to some of your personal experiences, Michael. You're certainly incredibly adept at doing this work today, but we all learn through our experiences. So I appreciate the transparency and being a little bit vulnerable to share with our audience some of the things that you learned maybe the hard way, and unfortunately they have the opportunity to learn from those mistakes. You talk about, Michael, this idea that at some point we have to stop packing and leave for the trip, and I love that analogy. I'll admit that I haven't heard that one before. I very early in my career, I had a boss, for lack of a better term, who was just amazing at like coming up with a vision, and we would just start. And I would be like, "Wait, we don't know this, we don't know that." And his answer was always, "We're gonna figure it out when we get there, right? At some point, you got to just get going." Doesn't mean that preparation isn't important. Of course, it's important. You want to be prepared, but at some point, as we used to say in the world of research and development, there comes a time in every project where you have to take it away from the engineers and actually release the product to the marketplace, because they'll plan for it forever and ever and ever. And it's just interesting that analogy was so incredibly well aligned with that whole philosophy of making sure that we're certainly well prepared, but at some point we have to go. And to your point earlier, this is one of the least comfortable things probably until people get comfortable doing it. This whole idea of building relationships and working on development and philanthropy. So it's really easy to find excuses to put it off. We just need to do this one more thing. We just need to plan this one more thing, and then we'll get started. And the truth is, no, you got to get started today. And at this point in time is the point in time where we've got to go out and start building these incredible relationships, doing it the right way, and doing it within, I think, a little bit of a framework. One of the things that I've really learned from you, Michael, over the course of time is that there is a framework or a cadence to doing this. And so if you wouldn't mind, I'd love for you to share with our audience a little bit about how you think about what that framework looks like and what steps they should be considering.
Yeah, that's great. Let's get started. And this will take up the rest of the time we have, with this exception of having some time for closing and some questions. So I'm going to go through this with some deliberation. It'll be, I hope the audience absorbs some of the areas where they know they can do a little bit better. So let's look at the first step in this whole engagement process. And notice it is an engagement roadmap. I'm not talking about a donor roadmap or a fundraising roadmap, because words in our business truly matter, just like they do in the classroom and just like they do at the school board meetings. The words we use to tell our story matter. And I start off with a story that people in your community are generally already writing about your institution, about education in your community. And that story is being written from things that they see on the news, the conversations they have over coffee with individuals who live nearby and who live across town, things that they're seeing on social media. And so we have the ability to influence what people are already thinking about your school, your campus, your institution, your priorities, your upcoming referendum. So how we do that matters, because we're injecting things into their story that's already being written. The good news when it comes to education is that people are already thinking about it. We're not talking about a new disease for research. We're not talking about all the other important things that happen, but education in your community and workforce needs are two general topics that are well known. So we can take advantage of a knowledge level that's higher than if it was a brand new subject. The next stage in this is identifying those natural partners who might already have a connection to those stories that are being written. You may have people that are mentoring your students. You may have students who are in a summer work program in a particular industry or business. You may have youth apprenticeship programs. You may have dual enrollment where that student has dual enrollment, has a partnership that already makes sense for you to start the conversation. In part 2 of this next week, we're actually going to help you go through how do you identify your natural partners and where do you plug them in the best possible way for that story you're trying to tell. So make sure you come back if you want to learn more about that just for you. So once we have our identified our natural partners, we move to integrate. And this is a really important step that's often overlooked. And the reason why it's overlooked is that we believe that if someone chooses us, our organization, our institution, somehow they become one of ours. We hear this phrase, they become one of our donors. They never become one of our donors. We always remain one of their charities of choice. So we have to flip how we integrate their story. We are being invited to their homes to tell them what we bring value to in terms of student preparedness, helping students create their ideal futures, their preferred futures, helping fill a workforce need. They don't come to our school. While they do, the real success of philanthropy is when we can integrate our story and treat those individuals like we're one of their charities, one of their choices of organization support, not the other way around. Once we finish, and this takes some time, this will take a couple of months probably to get that list, make sure your priorities are aligned, make sure that leaders in your organization are aligned on the approach. Then we can begin to write the stories that we want to tell and to inspire those individuals. Now, in the common parlance of philanthropy, we don't usually say inspire. We use the word cultivate. I've never liked that word when it comes to fundraising. I say leave the cultivation to the farmers. That does till the soil, that things grow, but people really shouldn't be cultivated. They should be inspired. And how do you inspire them? That's a question. Well, one of the ways is to bring them into your school, show them what you're doing, and tell them how they might be involved. But we run into a problem here. The problem we run into is we tell them too much too soon. We inspire them with every story of every successful student, not just a couple of the most meaningful ones. Occasionally, we'll see organizations tell stories that are 15 years old, and potential donors want to hear stories that are 6 months old, 16 months old at the very least. We also have a problem here when we inspire because we show them everything. And I use two analogies here, Matt. If you ever been over to someone's house when they wanted to tell you about their vacation and they show you every picture that they took from the time that they got to the airport to the time they got home, and by the time you've seen this is what happened on the afternoon of the first Tuesday we were there, you're kind of tired of it. Well, we do that same thing in philanthropy because we get nervous. We get nervous that we're not telling them enough, so we share everything. The second thing we do is we tell them it's such a fast pace that they just feel like they've ingested an entire bag of potato chips and they don't feel very good. So we have to slow down. We have to set a good pace, tell a good couple of stories, and that's what will begin to inspire the donor to consider, not to say yes, because they haven't said yes yet. And you know why they haven't said yes yet? Is because we haven't done the next step. And that next step is the point of invitation. For many people who are nervous about asking somebody for a gift, I just make a simple mindset change. Instead of asking them to make a gift, invite them to continue to help you write the story that you're already writing for your students. Just last week, I gave somebody that advice. I said to him, Joshua, change your language from feeling you're asking somebody in your mindset to inviting them. In 24 hours, he raised $1,880. And he called me. He was all excited. He said, it worked. It worked. Now, for Joshua, in 24 hours, it was $1,800. But just imagine if he takes that framework into day 2 and 3 and month 4 and month 6. He has that mindset now that he is inviting somebody into the story. So if you're nervous on this call about it, asking for anything, think about inviting them. And if that still doesn't work, here's another tip I'd like to leave you with. We can ask individuals for permission to talk about their giving. And it sounds something very similar and simple as this. Mr. Jones, would it be okay if we talked about how you might help support the initiatives I just discussed? Most people in their human decency will not say, well, no, that sounds like a terrible idea. I don't want to talk about how I might support this. They will shake their head and say, yes, I was wondering how I might help, or sure, let me learn more. So instead of just launching into the invitation, we can start with the question, Mr. Jones, Miss Smith, would it be okay if we talked about how you'd like to support the initiative we just talked about? And that will actually lower the tension, lower the temperature to your nervousness, and really result in some very meaningful conversations because you'll begin talking about things that you both know that you want to talk about. A lot of people in their philanthropy programs will stop right here. They'll receive a gift, they'll get on with the next donor relationship, they'll get on to the next project, and they forget the next step of the engagement roadmap, and that's to inform individuals on how the gifts were used. Now, we think that when we send a letter and say, thank you very much for your gift to support our robotics program or our Skills USA program, we're doing exactly what they want. But what we're really doing is we're just fulfilling a responsibility that the IRS has, that charitable gifts be acknowledged. We're really not saying thank you in the right way. So don't do it right away. Yes, send the things that are important, but 90 days later, have a student write a note saying, I just want to let you know that because of your support of Skills USA, our team just went to the nationals and we placed in X. Or because of your support, I now have a new way to look at my future. My career bound plan after high school is to go into industry and do welding because I got a chance to work on the robotic welder that you helped our school achieve. Whatever it happens, make sure that the information and impact about how that gift was used is really known to a donor. Here's another thing that generally happens. When we get gifts, we think that writing a year later and saying, thank you for your last gift of $100 to support our STEM education initiatives. Will you consider another gift? That's not informing them. That's just asking it again. And we really want to make sure we have time in between when we invited the gift, when we received the gift, to let them know about how the gift was used. And then the last step is really looking at how is it that we can involve that individual or that company. This is the part where the relationships really come to fruition. When we involve a company that's already giving us a gift philanthropically, maybe there's an opportunity for mentoring. Maybe they can come in and be part of a career fair or a science fair. Maybe there can be a job shadow that's set up. You begin to take the relationship away from just the dollar amount and move it to something more significant. So we talk about moving that from success to get the gift to significance to what it means to the students that you're trying to serve. That involvement and investment piece will be right for about 10 or 15% of the people who give to you. So it's not everybody. Let's be honest about that. But let's also not miss the opportunity to figure out who might be those individuals or those companies who want to come alongside of our students for the long term. That's the biggest difference between a relationship that's built on a philanthropy relationship that's built on a transaction and that one that's built on transformation. And we're really focused here on the engagement map. When we talk about the stories, when we integrate their stories and recognize that they are one of the people who chose us, they're not one of ours, makes a big difference when it comes to the rest of this. Because when we involve and invest well in those relationships, guess what? It comes back to be even more inspiring to those individuals, and that cycle then continues along the way. So when you see that line going from involve and invest down to inspire, you really get the idea that this is an engagement roadmap that truly works.
It's
I do want to point out one more thing here, if I
Go ahead.
could, Matt, is
Yep.
that occasionally, if an individual or corporation is already involved with you in your school and they haven't made a philanthropic gift, we can start there. We can start with that relationship already intact and move to the inspiration stage. So while we don't have to always identify people that we don't know, sometimes we can just manifest and build a relationship with the people that we do know.
Without question, and I think this whole idea of involving and investing, Michael, and it's interesting that every one of these steps starts with the letter I, so we can have a little bit of a tool to remember every one of them. And we've seen, or organizations where, in the case of a private employer, maybe donating materials to be used on the machine, maybe loaning their engineers to help mentor the students, as you suggest, inviting the students into their facility. We see private donors, individuals who are volunteering right in the classroom, helping with STEM learning, helping with advanced manufacturing learning, Industry 4.0 learning. So I want to make sure that one isn't lost. And I think especially in technical education and STEM, there's some great opportunities to involve our donors, to involve our philanthropic partners. So really, really important to cover that, and that's part of your process. The other thing I'll mention is what I really, really like about this approach is that it's about the donor and it's about the partnership, and it's not about the money. And the truth of the matter is every single step in what you shared is about building a transparent, honest, non-duplicative relationship, a non-duplicitous relationship, I should say, with the donor. It's not about how are we getting money, it's about how are we inspiring them, how are we helping them to live out their dreams. And when you do that, then great things happen. And it's all about, we tell people all the time, in securing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent. They know their communities, they know their employers, they know their students, they know their institutions way better than we ever could. It's not for us to tell them what to do, it's for us to make them aware of what's possible. And I would say that that is the same thing that these individuals are doing when they're building relationships. It's not about telling the donor what they should be doing, it's about showing them what's possible. And to the extent they're inspired around a shared goal, that's when the great opportunities come about. So I really appreciate the way you shared all this. I know, Melissa, we're hearing a ton from our audience, so I would love to hear some of the Q&A you're hearing either through the Teams platform or otherwise, and would be happy to answer any questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Matt. To our audience, we're going to open it up for audience Q&A at this time. I'll say it's not every day that you get an opportunity to just ask some subject matter experts about money and asking for money. So this is a great time to throw those questions in there. And um, I'll also say that I'm happy to ask the questions anonymously. So if you don't feel comfortable having your name out there, that's fine as well. But a really great question that we'll kick off with, Michael, is you mentioned in your story that you were having coffee one on one with a potential donor. So, is this one on one conversation the best way to start, or what is the ideal number of people to your point, not overwhelm somebody at the beginning?
There's a couple of parts of that question I would address. First of all, I think it comes down to personal preference. Until you get really comfortable with how you approach potential givers to your organization, it may be better to do it in a group setting. It might be better to bring somebody with you that represents the same school or educational district that you do, so you don't feel alone, so that there can be a gentle handoff in that conversation. But ultimately, what I have found is that when people talk about their own personal resources and how they'd like to invest them, 2 people probably is the maximum number of people I would ever have at a table when we're talking specifically about a gift. Because whether we like to admit it or not, we all have these ideas about how money should be used or who has it and who doesn't. And some people, just rightly so, are protective of that and want to have more of a, I'll call it an intimate, with a small I, relationship with that donor. So my preference has become one-on-one, but I know as people grow in their comfort level, sometimes having more people is better. And then also when they really want to make sure that they can hit all cylinders, they won't even have that meeting. They'll actually invite a group of 10 or 12 people into the school, do a tour, and talk to them sort of collectively. And from there, take those next steps forward.
Perfect. Similar question, but is there an ideal person at the school who should be making these reach outs? And what do you think of students participating? I ask because we have a first robotics team, and part of that activity is that the students are supposed to be doing their own fundraising.
Yeah, that's really good questions. I'm glad people are thinking about philanthropy this way, in the sense of the right ways and the mistakes to avoid. From a student perspective, I'm oftentimes a little guarded in terms of when they actually make the request. If they're making a request for their club and they go to the local uh, Kiwanis club and talk about the $500 or the $1,000 that they need to put that logo on the side of their robotics vehicle for the competitions or on their website, that all makes a lot of sense. I like that. It helps the young person get more confident in their speaking to really begin to tell their story. But when it comes to higher level fundraising that really is going to transform an entire program for your school or build out an entire program, I'm talking about 3, 4, 500,000, $1 million, that really is somebody at the level who can be trusted. And I should just mention this to our audience. There are 3 top reasons why people give. One, they believe in the mission. They like your school. They're fully engaged. Number 2, that they trust the leadership. And the leadership can be the principal, it can be the CTE coordinator, it can be the teacher. It's generally not the student. And the third reason is because they're asked. So whoever it makes sense who can inspire the gift, that's who I would say I would start with. But limit the students to something that feels more comfortable, and then certainly use students in the informing about the impact of those gifts once that gift is made.
Awesome. Thank you. This other person said, we have several partnerships with local businesses who have been involved with our program for many years, tours and um, job shadows and guest speakers. Do you have any advice on how to take that conversation to one of financial giving?
Yes? Ask them. No, I knew that's not a satisfactory answer. I get that. I would go back to what I advised earlier is, to say you've been involved with us for a long time. You see the value of what we're doing in our curriculum. You've seen how our leadership and our school board has made decisions to advance education and get our students ready for their preferred future. The piece that could really be helpful is for you to come alongside with us with a philanthropic gift so that we can do this instead of that. Because I believe that philanthropy should help organizations do more of something, not necessarily the same of something. And so if you don't know what that more of something is, it goes back to that. How do you ask for $1 million? You have to have the $1 million idea. And again, that's going to be part 2. But in this situation, just have that honest conversation. Silence the tapes that money is bad to talk about. Turn up the volume on the confidence you have. And rather than look at this like well, we have a budget shortfall, we have a tendency now, and I get it, to talk about education as being underfunded. And in many places it is, and the formulas are wrong. But that shouldn't be the lead in. The lead in should be, because budgets are tight, because we're struggling in this area, we have a greater opportunity for philanthropy to help us achieve what our students are looking for in their lives. So use the platform of difficult budgets not as a reason like, oh, really need it. No, this is an opportunity for donors to come along and fill a gap that's visible, and it can be extraordinary once filled.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. I think we're gonna cap it at that for our questions for today. Also knowing that and we got some good questions, but we also have part 2 of this webinar series where we're gonna share a lot more details. And I want all of our attendees to come back next week. Matt, I will leave it to you to wrap it up, but before you do, a reminder to everybody that you will be getting a recording of this webinar as well as an invitation to register for next week if you haven't already.
Thanks, Melissa. Wonderful job putting all of this together. And Michael, just an incredible, incredible wealth of knowledge that you provide to our audience. I think whatever the expectations were going into this webinar, they have been far exceeded in terms of the different strategies and the different ideas that you have presented to them, and just a totally different way of thinking about philanthropic giving. So, Michael, thank you so much for joining us. I'll talk about the next webinar here in a moment, but it's just been absolutely, absolutely amazing. If you are as intrigued as I am by Michael's experience and this framework that he put together, and I think those I words that he put on that dial, showing us exactly what steps we go through to create these amazing partnerships for all of the right reasons. If you're as impressed by all of this discussion today as I was, you are definitely going to want to join us next week, funding your school's $1 million vision. So we talked about a lot of this week from 30,000 feet. We talk about mistakes that we want to avoid. We talked about Michael's background. We talked about the data that's available to us and what we're seeing in the world of development. Really, really great information. Next week, we go down to ground level and we talk about how you create those rock solid relationships, whether it's a foundation, whether it's an employer, whether it's a community member, anybody that would be out there that would be inspired, as Michael puts it, around the incredible work that is happening in your district. How do we go find those individuals and build those relationships? You're definitely going to want to join us next week. Register for that particular webinar, Funding Your School's $1 Million Vision. So we will be back a week from today to share that information. In the meantime, thank you so much to everybody who joined us. It's been a wonderful time. Really appreciate you being with us, and we look forward to seeing you all next week.